Thoughtful tutorial video series, and today we are in Thoughtful video 3. Today I want to talk about ways that we can unhook from unhelpful thoughts. You know, there are lots of thoughts that we have that don't help us get to our goals, and part of this is recognizing these thoughts in our thinking. So in our first two video series, one was starting to slow down enough that you notice your thinking and that you have thinking about your thinking, a higher order skill. And the second video, we started to talk about thought trains. Well, today we're going to use a different analogy, and some people call it putting a label on our thoughts. I like to think of it as a style of thinking. Recognizing just like you can put on a certain style of clothes every day as you get up in the morning, bright colours for some days, maybe monochrome on other days, cold weather, winter gear on some days, depending on the weather and the seasons and your mood. Well, in the same way, you have styles of thinking. Some of your styles of thinking will have come from your family background, from ways that you've seen other people think, from your own experience of thinking a certain way and having an outcome from it. So I want you to think of your thinking as having styles as well. And sometimes we can have an unhelpful or unnecessarily negative style of thinking. So where our thinking goes down a negative spiral. So I'm going to give you a whole list of different types of thinking styles. And as we go through this list, I'm going to give you a few examples, and I want you to imagine if you notice any of these styles are ones that you've used yourself. So the first thinking style I'm going to talk about is all or nothing thinking, black or white thinking. It's sort of like the style where we see something as all good or all bad. There's no grey in the middle of this. I remember one of my patients many years ago coming in on a fortnightly basis early in the week, and each time he came he would describe his weekend as, oh, it was the best weekend ever, or it was the worst weekend ever. It was very much and very clearly an example of all or nothing or black or white thinking. I remember many years ago when my middle child at school came home and said, I had the worst day in the world, and I had to sit him down and ask what was worst about that day. And it turned out it was just one thing, someone who said something mean at lunchtime. The rest of the day was fine, but that one event had coloured it so that they saw it as all terrible. Sometimes we have that sort of thinking. We have one event that colours everything, and we think that it has made that day or that week or whatever the worst week. Another style of thinking is catastrophizing. We often catastrophize by having thinking about what could be the worst case scenario. Now, I have friends who swear by catastrophizing. They wouldn't call it catastrophizing. They would call it being prepared for the worst case scenario. There's even books on worst case scenarios out there. But I actually don't think it's a very helpful style of thinking. You might think it's being prepared. You might think that by having thought of the things that could go wrong, that in your thinking of it, you've made yourself aware of the possibilities of things that could go wrong. But, I'm going to just say, this is a big but, it puts a negative light on whatever it is that you're going through, where you are now on the lookout for things to go wrong. If you're on the lookout for things to go wrong, you're more likely to see little things that suggest that things are about to go wrong. I'm going to suggest that a catastrophizing style of thinking puts a negative frame right at the front of your thinking, right on at the thought trains that are going past your platform. And if you choose to go on those thought trains, it will take you towards more fear and anxiety. Another style of thinking is personalizing. Personalizing is a style of thinking where things happen, we focus on ourselves and our possible part to play in the situation that is in front of us. The problem with this style of thinking is that we make a lot of assumptions, and oftentimes the assumption is, I did something wrong. I'm the cause of this problem. I'm the one who, triggered this situation or this whole scenario to unfold. But the reality is that most times we are only a bit player in the situations that are in front of us. And oftentimes when we make those sort of assumptions, we basically blame ourselves, and this may not be true. One of the examples I have from personalizing comes from my patients from many years ago, a lady who worked in an open plan office, and she came to me for another issue, but when we were going through this style of thinking, she recognised how much she was personalising about a situation. There was a lady in her office who she used to spend a lot of time with, have morning tea with and catch up with, and she said, for the last 3 months they hadn't talked. She said, I don't know what I said, I don't know what I did, but my friend won't even say hello to me. She just turns away. I asked my patient, could she think of any other reason why her friend was not talking to her? And my patient couldn't think of anything other than, I've said something, I've done something to upset her. And I started challenging her about this. I said, well, what would happen? What if she's going through something really hard, something really difficult, and she doesn't want to share it with you? What if her marriage is on the rocks and she feels that she'll become emotional if she shares what's going on in her life? Maybe she's going through a health issue and she doesn't really want to share all the ins and outs of her health struggles. Maybe she's going through depression and is ashamed of the things that she's been thinking of. I gave her a whole lot of scenarios, and then I challenged her. I said, well, if you think you have upset her, why don't you go and ask her? Ask her directly. And a few weeks later, my patient turned up and she said, yes, I got up the courage finally to ask her, had I said something to upset her? And to her surprise, her friend looked up at her and said, I thought that I had upset you. These two ladies had gone for 3 months thinking that they had upset the other person. Probably one of them had walked past the other without saying hello on one situation when they were caught up in their thoughts, and the other person interpreted it in a personalizing way to go, oh, she's upset with me. Do you know, we can be personalizing in lots of different scenarios. Little children often think that they're the reason why their parents have split up. Oftentimes when a situation, someone's conflict happens in front of us, we think that we might have been the trigger. But we need to actually recognise that this style of thinking, of personalising in these situations, is unhelpful. It actually makes us always looking inwardly for our own faults, rather than recognising that we're probably only a bit player in most of the scenarios that we are involved in. Now, another style of thinking is actually when we have a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a style of thinking where we predict the future based on what's happened in the past. This style of thinking goes, because this has happened once, I expect it to happen again. So one negative event and we're already thinking that this will continue as the scenario in our life. Now, it is hard because many people have had repeated bad events in their life, have had a history of being bullied or being a victim in situations, but the self-fulfilling prophecy type of thinking means that we are always expecting the same things to happen again and again. The other part of self-fulfilling prophecy is that it stops us imagining a different scenario or even allowing a different scenario to occur, because we are anticipating and expecting and making our prophecy to come true by our actions of accepting what's happened in the past as being the same thing that will happen again and again. Another style of thinking is actually what we call emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is a style of thinking where something, because it feels true, we accept it to be true. So our thinking and our feelings are aligned together, and because we feel a certain way, we take whatever we feel to be the established fact. So someone who says, I feel ugly, therefore I must be ugly. I'm really stupid, I must be really, 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 really stupid in my own head, and so others must be seeing me as stupid. See, those sort of things are not the ways that we should be thinking in these situations. Life is quite complex, and we create scenarios in our own head, and we make those things happen, and we accept them as established facts, or we accept them because they feel true. But our feelings change all the time. And one day you might feel wonderful about something, but the next minute someone says something and you feel down on the dumps. So our feelings are not a good gauge of whether something is true or not. But oftentimes we use our feelings as that gauge. Oh, because it feels true, it must be true. I think we need to recognise that feelings are only one part of us. And yes, they're fickle. Feelings are fickle. They change all the time. So using our feelings as a basis for thinking one way means that we will get stuck in that thinking. Another style of thinking is where we have this situation where we can exaggerate the worst situation while at the same time minimise the best things. And we're all good at that. We exaggerate our faults. We exaggerate the negative parts that we see in a situation, and we just overlook, or we minimise the little things that have gone wrong. Well, the reality is that if we're able to step back from our style of thinking and recognise that we have had that magnification of the worst and minimisation of the best, that we're able to start to see things as they really are. Sometimes we need somebody else's perspective. Sometimes we need to actually say, hey, this is how I think about this. Am I seeing it as it really is? Or have I magnified all the worst parts of the situation? And, it's important for you to actually recognise that just because you think something does not make it a fact. Our thinking changes all the time. Just like our feelings are fickle, our thinking can also be fickle. So this is a space for recognising your thoughts come in all sorts of directions, and that we can have a style of thinking. Now, I haven't covered all the styles of thinking. There are heaps of them. But the start in this process to recognise that a style of thinking that you may have been using could be keeping you stuck in a certain way and a certain situation. I'm going to suggest as an exercise for you to do today is that if you've recognised yourself doing any of these styles of thinking, the black and white thinking, catastrophizing thinking, emotional reasoning, self-fulfilling prophecy, magnification and minimization, if you recognise yourself doing some of these types of thinking, try and remember an example. Think of an example that you had that you might have done using one of those styles. Now I'm going to suggest when you write down in your journal, your book, where you're writing down your exercises, have a little look at that thinking. Could there be another way you could think about it? And this is a place where we start to have good questions. And one of the ways that I challenge my thinking is I use good questions. I'm going to read through a whole list of questions that I have on a piece of paper here. Sorry, I really don't want to miss any of them, so that's why I'm going to read them out to you. Firstly, ask yourself, is this thought helpful? Is this thought realistic? Sometimes our thoughts are quite unrealistic. Is this an example of one of those styles I mentioned? So is my thought an example of one of those styles? Ask yourself, is there evidence for and against my thought? Okay. Am I focusing just on the negatives and ignoring a whole lot of positives? Am I jumping to conclusions without looking at all of the facts? Is there another possible explanation? How would somebody else look at the same things that I'm looking at, and what would they see that I might not see? Am I being too inflexible? Is it as bad as I'm making out? Even if I thought the worst case scenario, what's the chances of that happening anyway? How would I get through it if I was to see the worst case scenario? What could be a more helpful thought? If you are helping a friend go through a similar situation of challenging their thoughts, how would you help them in challenging a thought like the thought that you've just had? Have a go at some of those questions. They're pretty good questions to ask yourself. I actually sometimes write down a good question that I like. For me, on a piece of paper, you can write down one of those questions. If any of those questions resonate with you. For me, I've used, is there another possible explanation? I like that question. I sometimes need to not make a conclusion. I need to actually think of, could there be another way that I could think about this situation? So that's your exercise for today on styles of thinking. Firstly, to recognise the style of thinking, to write down an example of it, and write down some of these good questions. In Ephesians, the prayer that Paul wrote for each of us, that the whole family in heaven and earth is named under Christ Jesus, that he would grant to us the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might through his Spirit in the inner man, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width and length and depth and height, to know the love of Christ which passes knowledge, that you may be filled with the fullness of God. It's a great, great verse.